Hello and welcome to Fieldsports Britain. In the light of the Cumbrian shooting tragedy last week, we're devoting most of this programme to the political fallout. I'm with Rob Gray, who is Campaigns Director for the Countryside Alliance. Rob, the Countryside is very much your constituency. Now, this shooting started in a town, but it ended in Boot, which is a very rural area. What will people be feeling at the moment?
They're a hardy lot up there. I think they'll bounce back, but it's going to take time. The local MP said, the community needs time to heal. I think he's absolutely right, and the time for asking some of the harder questions will probably come in the future, but not now.
Is it fair to make a divide between small towns and rural areas, difference between Whitehaven and the fields around it? Because this appeared to be a small town problem.
That's one way of looking at it. I mean, these things are, they're so extremely rare and such a freak incident. But of course, as we all know, most of the sort of gun crime in this country is carried out with illegal guns, probably in towns and cities. So every event is different, and we'd be sort of reluctant to draw parallels, other than to say it's a complete disaster for the community and the country.
Well, before we reach any conclusions, I spoke earlier to Bill Harriman of BASC and an expert on the Antiques Roadshow on the guns that Derek Bird used. We're standing outside Parliament where things sound like they're going to go well, but they may go badly. Going back more than a century, Queen Victoria actually encouraged us to own guns, didn't she?
Well, it's Lord Salisbury who said, I hope to see a rifle in the chimney breast of every cottage in the land. That was after the Boer War, when a force of ragged Dutch farmers shot the finest professional army in Europe to pieces with modern rifles and clever tactics.
And what went wrong between that point and now?
Well, it's very interesting. After that happened, we saw the formation of the Society of Miniature Rifle Clubs, which then became the National Small Bore Rifle Association. There used to be a lot of rifle shooting in schools, and I think also National Service had quite a lot to play with people's familiarity with firearms. And over that intervening period, we slightly lost that familiarity with firearms, so that although there are a good number of people shoot, generally people in society don't know much about guns, and they're often frightened by the very prospect of them because they read so many horror stories in the press.
Well, did we really lose it, or did the subject just get overtaken by Hollywood and James Bond and that sort of side of gun?
I don't know quite where it went, but that ready familiarity that was around, certainly in my father's generation, has long gone.
I mean, there are still plenty of schools that have gun clubs. More and more of them are opening playgrounds. There
are indeed, and I'm always heartened by the Scout and Guide movement, who continue to have shooting as one of their activities. And of course, the good old Duke of Edinburgh Award, you can shoot for part of that.
Talking about the 2.2 specifically, which is one of the guns that we understand Derek Bird used, where did that come from?
That's got a very, very long history. The cartridge itself was developed in the 1850s by a Frenchman called Flaubert. And Monsieur Flaubert compressed a percussion cap and put a little round bullet in it and called it the BB cap, which is bulleted breech cap. And by about 1854, you start to see Smith & Wesson chambering their very, very small #1 model revolvers for this tiny little cartridge. And it wasn't really until about 1900 that you start to see mass-produced, well-made American firearms chambered for the 2.2 rimfire coming into this country and supplanting our native British Rook and Rabbit rifle, which generally tended to be chambered for a cartridge based on a small revolver. So that's where it comes from, and since then it's been the standard for pest control. And if you look at Winchester's model 1890, the pump-action rifle, great classic, you probably saw them in fairgrounds and things, and that's really where it comes from.
And the other great pest control gun is, of course, the 12-bore shotgun, which we also understand he had. I mean, he sounds like a kind of classic rabbiter. This is an armoury which a lot of people have, isn't it?
Yes, it's. If you look at the statistics, most people own about sort of 2.3 firearms, and that's absolutely down the line. He had, I'm guessing, a couple of shotguns and probably either one rifle or perhaps two. It's nothing untoward about it. Not one of what people call a gun nut with a huge arsenal, which is the favoured word for anybody who owns more than a small number of guns.
With your contacts in government, do you get any sense that there's any mood for firearms legislation at the moment?
Well, I'm heartened by what the Home Secretary has said today, and also the fact that there appears to be political consensus for let's look at what happened. And when we know what the facts are, then let's start the debate running, and I think that's good.
Undoubtedly, yesterday's killings will prompt a debate about our country's gun laws. That is understandable, and indeed it is right and proper. But it would be wrong to react before we know the full facts.
Well, despite the difficulties of obtaining a shotgun or firearm certificate, more than 700,000 people in the UK have one. Here are the hoops that we shooters have to jump through. In my county of Somerset, I have a very good relationship with my firearms liaison officer. I've got his mobile tapped down into my mobile as well, just in case I need him. Isn't that the case across Britain?
No, it's not at all, I'm afraid. In some places, it is very much, you will do what we tell you. In some places, Northampton's particularly good, where they ring you up and, hello John, it's Jim, your firearms inquiry officer. I'm just coming down to renew your certificate. When are you free? In others is, you will be in at 7 o'clock on Friday the 14th and I will be visiting you then. A good firearms inquiry officer is somebody who will come down, drink your tea, eat your biscuits and have a chat with you and then walk away and you'll wonder, what was that about? The bad ones are the ones who come in and say, how much do you drink in a week? What illegal substances do you take? Have you been beating your wife up recently? Those are the bad ones. They don't get the results. The good ones are the ones who do just that. Smile and be friendly and listen. But at the same time, they're making damn sure they know what your gun cabinet is, whether it's properly secured. They look at your wife to see if you've got any bruises on the face, how many vodka bottles you've left in the bin. Those are the guys who make a judgment call themselves rather than doing a tick box, which frankly doesn't work. Is
there any hope, with the spotlight now on shooting following these awful events in Cumbria, that there could be a rapprochement between shooters and these erring police forces?
It's been happening over the past years, yes, already, slowly but surely. Some police forces not so, some definitely so. Yes, I think there is a chance. Certainly the Association of Chief Police Officers, ACPO, are far more open to discussion than they used to be. There's a long way to go, but yes, I think there will be a rapprochement. This will be a setback, we know that, but it may also be an opportunity for us all to work together for the common good.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I asked Roy Lupton, our own tame stalker and a member of the Hawk Board, just how difficult it was for him to get a firearm and shotgun certificate.
For us to be in possession of a firearm certificate or a shotgun certificate, then we have to be vetted by the police. We have to have references from respectable members of the community, and we get regular checks from the different police departments. And so, from my perspective, with where gun laws are concerned, I don't think there's an awful lot that can be done about that. I think it's a terrible and an unfortunate incident that's happened, but at the end of the day, it's an individual person that's at fault, not the gun, not the weapon that he's chosen to use in the crimes that he's committed. So I think from that perspective, I'd hate to see a knee-jerk reaction from the general public as a result of this that would interfere with an awful lot of people's lives and livelihoods.
Well, with the 2.2 and the 12 bore established firmly as the pest controller's guns of choice, in the 1960s came the first of the draconian legislation against guns. If I'd wanted to apply for a 12 bore shotgun and a 2.2 rimfire rifle in 1967, what would I have needed to have proved?
Very little indeed. You would complete a form, not a particularly difficult one, get a gun licence, and that was very broadly it. It was the 1968 Consolidation Act, which unfortunately was a reaction to the Shepherd's Bush murders, where 3 police constables were gunned down with an illegal pistol by some criminals. This was a Consolidation Act, really, which put a lot of the stuff together that otherwise was in scattered different places, and that was the first of the real big Firearms Act, if you like.
And that was a clampdown on legal gun owners after an illegal handgun was used in the crime.
Absolutely so, yes. And then we went on to the 1988 Firearms Amendment Act, which of course was a result of the Hungerford shooting, where he used an AK-47. So at that point they banned self-loading rifles and also put pump-action shotguns, etc. onto Section 1 and added further restrictions on shotguns. Now around about that time, the ownership of firearms in the United Kingdom reached the peak, and that was from there on the decline started in numbers of people who actually had firearms and the number of the firearms they possessed. When that started to decline, and then of course we had the dreadful affair of Dunblane, and the 1997 Firearms Amendment Act when pistols were banned. And again, we lost even more shooters, more certificates. And if we go back now to '88 and we look at the number of people killed and injured by the use of illegal firearms, now I have to look at that because that's a good measure. If you talk about gun crime, well, that's a bit unfair because failing to sign a certificate is a gun crime. It's a firearms related incident. So if we look at people killed and injured, in the 1988 it was 410, nice easy number to remember, 410. Then following on from that, we had more and more restrictions, and we now find that we're now down to about 2/3 of the number of certificate holders we had then. And how many people have we got killed and injured? We're looking in the 2,000-3,000s. So it's gone through the roof. Armed crime and the legal possession of firearms, I'm sorry, they just do not marry together. So regrettably, all those restrictions don't appear to have saved any lives, don't appear to have helped anybody, and certainly haven't helped the sport of shooting, I'm afraid.
Well, Rob, Mike, Bill and Roy there showing just how tough it is to get hold of a gun in this country already. What did the 1988 and 97 Acts do?
Well, yeah, I feel those were two classic pieces of knee-jerk legislation, albeit carried out by politicians under extreme pressure, facing hostile public and media opinion. But if you look at Dunblane, for example, handguns were banned, yet handgun crime rose after Dunblane. So we would hope that this time, while emotions are understandably running high now, that politicians take time to work out what, if any, procedural changes would be needed to stop this sort of thing happening again. But I would say that, in my personal view, that a truckload of legislation would not stop a psychopath.
Well, all this does lead to the crunch question: what will the politicians do? I spoke earlier to Selena Masson, former news editor of Shooting Times and now on Sporting Rifle magazine.
They've given a very measured response so far, I think, compared to Labour, who would have rushed in with big statement actions of banning left, right and centre. I think David Cameron has taken a very sensible approach, waiting to see what the full facts are as they emerge.
We should be clear that in this country we have some of the toughest gun control legislation anywhere in the world, and we shouldn't make any knee-jerk reaction to think there is some instant legislative or regulatory answer.
I think what's important to remember in a situation like this, that the type of gun that has been used in this incident, okay, it is a shotgun, okay, it is a licensed shotgun, but if you look at the statistics, in 2008-2009, there were 4,250 offences using handguns and only 617 using shotguns. So I think when people say gun crime, I think they need to not couple in licensed farmers, sports shooters, target shooters in with that, because obviously they're using their guns for legitimate reasons. I think moving forward, I think we could see there being annual health checks for licence holders. I think maybe the price of a licence could go through the roof. I think they could make it much more difficult to get hold of one, and a much more exclusive thing to have, and make it all round much more difficult for people.
Well, Rob, Selena, they're obviously fearful that although there won't be any more bans, it could become harder to own the guns we're allowed to own at the moment. Do you think that's true?
At the moment, because it's a live police investigation and the police and government need time to carry out their inquiries, I think it's too early to say.
But if I pushed you to speculate a bit?
Well, certainly from a Countryside Alliance view, we would be pushing for next to no changes, because we can't see how legislation can stop a lunatic like Derek Bird.
But don't the wider public brought up on a diet of Hollywood machine guns, don't they want a ban as a kind of a price for what's taken place?
Well, look, if we thought that a ban on all legally held guns in this country would stop gun crime, you know, I'd be right up there at the head of the queue. But the fact of the matter is, there is no evidence to suggest that any measures in this direction will stop people like Derek Bird carrying out these atrocities, which are extremely rare, but they do happen. But you can't legislate for lunacy.
Rob, thank you very much. Now, let's leave the last word to Bill Harriman. Can we use firearms legislation to legislate against loonies?
No, in the same way as you can't use the DVLA to stop somebody deciding that he's going to mow down a bus queue with his car. Or equally somebody who is hacked off with life, with society, buying himself a jerry can full of petrol and setting someone's house on fire. If somebody's minded to do that, unless there is some form of indication to people close to him, then you can't legislate against it. The FBI have a thing when they look at their profiles and they refer to people as goal orientated, and if somebody is goal orientated and you don't know who he is, then I'm afraid there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, we're back with Roy Lupton now, because not only has he had trouble jumping through hoops to get his firearms certificate, he's hatched a whole lot of goshawk chicks. It's not the most tuneful of dawn choruses, but these young goshawks are certainly telling Roy that it's time for breakfast. On the menu this morning is a bit of quail. There's also an egg that's nearly ready.
What we've got here is an egg that's due for pipping, and the air sac on the egg was drawn down over the last couple of days and it should be pipping today, so just to make sure that we're all running okay, we're just going to put it in the egg buddy and have a monitor of its heartbeat and see where it is, making sure that he's all still running and going okay. That's the thing with these, you've got to make sure you take your hands off and don't get any vibration. There we go. So if you look on here, we've got a heartbeat of between 250 or 280 there.
Roy is having a pretty successful year. He had been worried that erratic weather conditions were disturbing his broody females.
There were a few eggs that unfortunately didn't make it for one reason or another, but it's been a very peculiar year with weather this year. When the females were laying eggs, it was, you know, one day it was hot, one day it was cold, and it really did interfere with their cycles and the formation of the eggs. So it's actually turned out to be a little bit of a better year than I thought it was going to initially.
Would that have had implications for birds in the wild?
You know, when we interfere, then we notice a lot more, or when we're doing it, when we're hatching the babies, we notice a lot more because we're monitoring them. Whereas if they were hatching in a wild state in a nest, then it would go unnoticed, wouldn't it? But I think the changing weather patterns that we're getting is definitely going to have, or definitely having an effect on my breeding. So it wouldn't surprise me if it does have an effect on the wild population of birds.
These chicks at the breakfast bar are just a few days old and are doing well. This bunch is also a few days old, but look much bigger.
These are actually the same age as the other ones, but these are a different subspecies of goshawk, and they've got a lot more. They seem to have a lot more down on them, so they're getting too hot in the brooders. So we've moved them on a couple of days earlier than we would do normally into the next brooding chambers, which aren't as warm because they were getting too warm. These ones were getting too warm in the ordinary brooders.
Some of Roy's birds have already gone to falconers across Europe, but this chap is staying put.
I want this to be a complete raving food imprint because I'm going to be using him for AI in later years, so we'll just... Oh, we're not that hungry for breakfast then.
With so many mouths to feed, thankfully Roy has some help from a fellow falconer from Germany who's keen to learn how successfully to rear these amazing birds.
I've learned a lot of stuff, especially with rearing the chicks until the third day and then just changing to the junior food. I really learned a lot here in these few days.
As well as breeding his own goshawks, Roy is also rearing some young peregrines, and they too have an appetite.
With the baby peregrines, they're a lot more greedy than the hawks, and they've got a massive gape as well, so they can fit a lot more down at any one time. So it's a damn sight quicker feeding peregrines than it is feeding young hawks. Done. Well, you're being very delicate this morning, aren't you, though? Yes.
It's a 24/7 job being a parent to these hawks, but unlike children, this lot will leave the nest in weeks, not years. Well, we met Selena Masson earlier, and she's not just an expert on political and public opinion. She and her boyfriend Simon are also keen wild boar stalkers near their home in Sussex. There have been wild boar in the UK now for more than 25 years. But for Simon Barr and Selena Masson, their relationship with these amazing creatures is relatively new. It all started with a boar hunting trip to Germany, and they didn't even shoot anything.
Well, I went out to Germany with Selena to go and stay with some hunters for a 3-day hunting trip, and it's the first time I'd had any experience with boar, and this was back in October last year, and absolutely loved it. Spent lots of very cold hours in high seats waiting for nothing to happen. We didn't shoot any boar on the trip, but we spent all of the next day going and looking for signs for the boar, and it was fantastic kind of piecing together all of the clues in the woodland to see where the animals had been, which feed station they'd been to the night before, and as a result of that I got what they would call boar fever.
However, at the end of last year they were given permission to shoot on this wood on the Kent-Sussex borders, and they've been putting plenty of hours in getting to know and prepare the site.
Initially, we started off with commercial pig food, sow rolls. We thought that would be, the obvious choice, and it worked incredibly well. It also worked incredibly well for everything else in the woodland, including all of the local dog population. We've got a stealth camera that we use, and we got some fascinating wildlife pictures of boar, badgers, foxes, Labradors, terriers, pretty much everything that you could imagine that might be coming through a woodland. And so we then sort of filtered it down and ended up coming to the same method that the Germans use, which is just straight maize. Dogs and foxes don't like it, and badgers don't. They have a nibble on it, but it's not something that they would choose to eat necessarily on a regular basis. So the boar love it, and the deer do as well, and obviously we're keen to sort of promote a healthy population of the boar and the deer.
As well as seeing the food disappear, there are plenty of other signs which clearly show that pigs are about. And they're also having plenty of fun trying to capture them on film with this infrared camera. It's all very well feeding the boar, but it's all a bit pointless if they won't come close when you're sitting up a high seat with a rifle. And after a few fruitless cold nights, Simon and his friend come up with a plan.
Well, initially we had the high seat too close to the feed station, and although we got a couple of nights where we got very, very close encounters with the boar, which was very exciting, it meant that we, with the prevailing wind direction being southwesterly, because we're in a slight valley, as the wind was coming through, there was an eddy current underneath the high seat that was sucking our scent down onto the feed station, and it took us probably 5 or 6 nights worth of very cold waiting and seeing nothing, and having had a lead up to that with boar every night, to realise that it must be our scent that's creating the issue. So we got smoke canisters one evening just before it got dark, and tried to replicate as if we were going to sit and wait for the boar. Let the smoke canisters off and just watched what the trail of smoke did, and we could see quite clearly that the smoke was trailing back down onto the feed station, and as a result of that we moved the high seat, and the first night after we'd moved it we had a result, so it was definitely a worthwhile exercise doing.
Simon and Selena are passionate about their field sports and their new site. They took 2 boar from here earlier in the year, but there'll be no more shooting until October, as they appreciate that to keep a sustainable boar population they have to impose their own closed season. If only DEFRA gave the boar the same respect. We hope in the autumn their efforts will be rewarded, and we'll be there to film it. Well, we're back next week. This has been Fieldsports Britain, still rural, even in a suit.